And away we go. So, first of all, we're going to kind of flex our muscles a little bit with our worlds. We didn't do the landscape tool last week because we were trying to keep things pretty simple. But I'm going to do a new map, and we're going to utilize the sky that's in here. And we're going to delete this box, our ground. Okay? So we're going to first of all make a world, and I already have some starter content on here. See right there's like some particles and stuff like that. So we have some things that we can use to make this landscape. At the top left is the landscape tool, right? So I'm going to click this button. It's going to make a green grid, and here's kind of like our grid, and you can see that it doesn't go on for forever. It's just really, really big. Okay. Now in VR, we don't need a really big world. This is by default thinking about being like a driving game or something like that. Like it's a pretty big island of land. But this is also going to be converted into a mesh, and we have to think about polygons. So I'm going to keep it fairly simple, and I can make it like smaller sections and smaller, like this makes it a smaller, less quads. And then I could say within those quads, use less resolution. So we can make a default to start off with. But I recommend kind of just messing around with settings. But you can see what they do. So let's do like 200 by, or let's do 100 by 100. There we go. Got a nice small little world. Let's do 6. Great. So it's like half the size it was before, with half the resolution. So it's as far as we can see, right? From our perspective. And then I'm going to say create. And now it's created a mesh. There's actually an Unreal game that figured out how to do this at runtime, so you can edit the land and build things up and take things down. It's a pretty cool mechanic. Cool. So I now have this grid, and this is my palette to begin with. Okay? And what I have here is something that's very similar to Photoshop, right? It's like a brush. It has a center where everything is it's a gradient, right? It's from the center ring to the outer ring. And what this is kind of an alpha of strength for sculpting. So by default, when I click on the left mouse button, it's going to raise things up, right? And it's going to raise things up in the center of the circle more than it raises things up along the edge, right? So there's a fall off on that. So if I click, boom, right? I've created a plateau. And you can, that's literally representation of this fall off thing. And then like Photoshop, I can draw. Right? Right, so I'm creating a little mountain range. So it helps hide, the edge of the thing. So I'm creating a mountain range around me, so I don't have to worry about that. Like, oh, I can see through your edge of your world. And then, right? And let's go to the scope. And so right here is the strength, right? That determines how fast it goes up. If I want less, if I don't want it to have to do as much, like now it's going to be less subtle, right? It takes a little longer for it to go up. A little longer for it to go up. The size, right, it makes sense, right, a little more detail. And then the fall off can be like how dramatically that fall off is, right? So just like Photoshop, it's got some settings, right? And that's good for right now. That's how we sculpt. Now we come over to paint. It's actually not painting it as in color, it's painting with sculpting tools, right? So it's thinking about itself as a Photoshop kind of paint. So right now we have the paint tool, which is making it was creating geometry, and we can also smooth things out, right? We want to smooth this so it's less of a pronounced thing. Let's go to the strength and make it much stronger, so it's really going to smooth it out quicker, because I had a really hard edge there. Smooth it out, and then let's do the size, right? Smooth. Really not seeing it though. Show me smooth. We have different kind of fall-offs, right? We linear and smooth and spherical, and different kind of brushes. You can use like patterns and stuff like that. Other things we have are like flatten. I think I have to hold down Control. They've changed the sculpting tools since I've done it last. That's fine. And then we have noise, which will add in a little bit more variation. But I'm not seeing it. I might have to do a little research and then come back to you guys and append this video, because they've changed the sculpting tools in the most recent version. I'm painting on, showing everything. Brush size, noise. I'm going to add noise. Strong and scale. Interesting. I've never seen that before. Can I still paint? I can't even paint anymore. I must have clicked something. Let's go back to Sculpt. Sculpt Tool. Let's see if we can smooth this way. There we go. I was in the wrong section. So right here, we're going to stay in the Sculpt area, and then my tools are right here that I'm going to use. So then I can flatten things out. Sorry about the false alarm. Right? Flattens everything, makes it a little road. Right? Right? So just like go through these things. You can actually simulate like erosion after a while, right? Like how things would erode with water and stuff. It really gets into it. Now the noise would work, right? Crazy, crazy, crazy noise. Let's take down the strength a little bit and make this noise scale much smaller. And now I could probably add a little more detail. Whoa! Let's make the brush size smaller. Good, I'm glad it's working now. That was crazy. So noise scale even smaller. Alright, it's adding a little noise. Even smaller. I want it to be like, there we go. So it makes it a little more organic, right? Great. That makes everyone happy. We have a little world now. What I've probably done is I have made my player start go under the ground. Yes. So we'll have to move that real quick. Let's take our player start. So once we're done with this, let's exit out of it by clicking back to the place where we're just be placing things, right? So now we're right here, and now it's like it was before. There's no brush in here. I grab my player start, see that he's underground, and bring it back out. And this is where we'll start. Now, unless we live in Alice in Wonderland and we have a checkerboard world, we might want to add in our grass at this point, right? So the very simplest thing, we could do grass and for the starter content, and then it will tile itself, and we'll have shaders compile, and we have grass. But that's really still going to feel like two-dimensional. I want trees, right? I want bushes. I want things in my world, and I want to be able to paint them on using the same painting tools, right? With fall off, with density, with size of brush, stuff like that. So back up here at top, we have the Foliage Tool. Click on that, and what we have again is a brush, and it has a density, and we can also erase things. And what we're going to do is drop in things we want to be our foliage here. Steve, I don't know if you did this when you were doing your grass. This was the process. Yeah. So this is how I was able to draw on grass and then erase a certain path of grass to make a thing, which is why I asked him about that. So we need to choose meshes. So we're going to filter by a static mesh right here. And then we can start thinking about things we want to add in. Well, I want to paint some, these things aren't very interesting, but we're not going for photoreal, so we'll definitely do a bush, right? We definitely need to have a bush. Let's do there. And so now it's I now can draw it on, right? I just want to make sure you guys can see it though. There we go. There's Mr. Bush. It has a count right here, right? So I have 0 in there so far right now. And then there's some other things. There's some simple grass. That makes sense. And then there are statues, and maybe we'll paint with a couple of spheres. Right? It's whatever we want. Those things. And then also HMDs. We want to grow mini headsets. Right? There we go. So now we're painting with all 6 of these objects, and if I select them, there's some more options down here, and it's about how we want them to be placed. Like, do we want to place more of the headsets and less of the trees? That kind of thing. Like, you like, I want a lot of rocks. It's very rocky terrain with only a couple of trees here and there. And instead of having to do a bunch of different passes, we could figure out that algorithm of how we want them to be placed. Like, if we want to make sure that they're scaled differently, we could do that here. We can also say, do we want it to align with the incline of the terrain, right? Do we want all our trees to be up? But if they're on like a hill, maybe they should come out like that. Like, you know, so these are all the settings you guys can play around with as you're doing your painting. And then let's go ahead and make our brush a little bigger and take a look. I'll just add a little dollop, right? A little dollop of paint. And there we go. It's a pretty dense, but here's our world we made of spheres and statues and plants and stuff like that, right? Super dense. So maybe we would want to have the painting density go down, but also maybe want to erase. Let's see how to do that. I thought I had. Let's paint just a little bit. A little more spread out. That looks pretty cool, right? Or do we just want to say, and then there was world? Right? There you go. So it's kind of, yeah. So I've created this whole little world. And so what it's doing is these are called instanced meshes. They're not, each of them, it doesn't have a collision. You can walk right through them. They're very lightweight computational. They're referencing there's one actual real mesh in this whole thing, and it's referencing it and duplicating the idea of it around so that it's really easy to render. This looks like it'd be like, oh, this is so many polygons, but this is actually kind of lightweight because it does not have to compute. It won't do high quality shadows. It won't do high quality lighting and all that kind of stuff. What we do is we can create hero assets. Like these could be in the distance, and if I need some interactive of these objects real close by, I will manually place those, and those are our hero objects that we can actually interact with, and then we can create all this other stuff that we won't actually go into. Like you can actually create blocking volumes, so you can't like teleport or wander into these other areas where we're not putting much detail. Just like we did when we opened up VR Showdown, where the city was only like a Hollywood set. It was only what that camera could see, and behind that, let's not waste it with putting items there. Right? This is crazy. So I could maybe like lasso select some. Let's see if we can just delete. Okay, so we're gonna start from scratch. We have a little bit out here. That's fine. And then you can also, I think, pick individual instances and just delete actually specific ones. So you can, there's a lot of different ways to play around with this tool. And let's go back to, we also have a paint bucket. So yeah, you just say fill, right? Fill. Well, that wasn't working. Let's go back to paint. And let's take our density down again. And these are all the things you want it to be able to paint on. I just want to paint on landscapes. I could paint on other static meshes. I don't really have any here, but just landscape. And just a happy little thing there, a happy little thing over there. There you go. Cool. Yay. 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 Cool. So it's really fun, right? And just right there. And so I'm going to exit out of this tool. I want to see if my landscape is still, where's my material? Yeah, show me grass. And that'll take a second to fill up. Cool. Now, you saw this lighting needs to be rebuilt thing. Let's just kind of ignore that for right now. It's trying to make really beautiful lighting. And we'll get into lighting like in another week. Basically, if a light doesn't move, it lets you bake in shadows, so it's not computing shadows. And I don't want you guys to build lighting on MacBooks, so we'll just kind of ignore it for right now. If I go to this light source, there's only one light, or there's two lights in here, but there's one light right here, this light source. It is set to be stationary, right, not to move, so that we can bake that stuff in. Let's just move it to movable, and that error goes away. It's not going to try to compute shadows or try to bake in shadows because it knows it's going to be moving around. It's like, then don't worry about it. So baking is for optimization. You should bake and you should have no movable lights, or at least you can have like one movable light in a VR experience, because it has to dynamically think about like the refraction of light and how shadows propagate and all that kind of stuff. It's very computationally expensive. But while we're on the screen, let's just stick with getting rid of the error message. Okay. Did you have a question, Brett?
Is building sort of synonymous with compiling?
Building is going through and doing the math of thinking about every single ray that can be shot out of these lights, and then actually embedding the shadows into the textures. You can actually look at, I don't have that window open. If you go to your world settings, which will put over here, you can actually see your light bakes down here, and you can see how it's altering and adding another texture onto your entire world and baking these shadows. There's it's definitely something you have to do before you can turn in a project, but it's not something I want to deal with right now, because it's such a beast, and it could take days to do. Not days, but hours. Yeah.
What about making it nighttime?
So I was actually getting nighttime next. So this wonderful little skybox is actually a blueprint that has oodles and oodles and oodles of interactivity that we're not going to worry about, but I just want to show you like it does a lot. All right. It does a lot. But we're not going to worry about all that thing it does, because we're just going to use its public variables. Right? If I these little variables, if I put the eyeball and say I can see it, it's public, and then if I click on it in here, they're all available for me in the details panel. And these variables are things like, what is my brightness, what is my cloud speed, like let's get our clouds going, right? 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 So it's like Unreal, when you open up your project, it has like a whole interactive day-night cycle and all this kind of stuff. It gives you a lot to work with to begin with. So when you want to, the clouds could be a little bit less, a little bit more, right? And then we could change the color of the sky right here, so it could be like, Mars sky or something like that. And then one thing I think is pretty cool is that if I look at this directional light actor, it says, what is the sun? So the sun is actually this light source. If I hit the little magnifying glass, it'll shoot me up to there. It is this light source. And you see how that light source has an arrow right there? That's the way the sun is kind of looking down. So if I take this light source and I make it, what is it, 180, 90, 90. If I make it looking directly up, right, you see behind the blue arrow is a white arrow. It's looking directly up. And then I come back to the sky sphere, and I say refresh my material. It's nighttime. And then we can bring out the stars. Cool? So we're just painting a little world, right? And there's some quick blueprints. I can send one to you that actually will take the sun and let it rotate in real time, so you can watch the sun go around the Earth and stuff like that. Like just a couple of, like you could tile in what time of day it is, and it'll be automatically there. So it's just a little bit of scripting to so you don't have to hit that refresh material. It'll do it automatically as the sun rotates, and we can animate the sun. And maybe I'll do that next week, and that could be part of the demo or something like that. But literally, as I rotate that this light source, if I double click it, I'll go towards it, and I could be different times of day. So I made it completely midnight, but it could be like sunset, right? Refresh the material, and now we have a beautiful sunset, right? So play around with that, totally fun, get you pretty far. Cool. So let's talk really quickly, like it's kind of completely changed mindsets. I just want to talk about materials. So we're going to build our own materials from scratch, because we're going to build on that and try to make photorealistic ones next week. So I just want to talk to you guys about this idea of instancing I mentioned when we were talking about the Foliage Tool, right? You want to make instances of a certain object, a parent object. And it's a very useful tool so that you're not building every material from scratch. You can create a parent material that has a lot of properties in it that you can change just subtle aspects of in every single instance of it, so that you're iterating much quicker. So for this little demo, I'm going to bring in our 3 cubes. So W, E, and R cycles between position, rotation, and scale. And there we go. We got 3 cubes. And I'm going to make a parent material, and then I'm going to create 3 different colors based off that. So for my organization, I like to create an assets folder. If you notice you brought in a lot of content from other projects, you'll see that their root folders start getting pretty complicated. I like to keep all my stuff in a folder called assets. No package uses the term assets as their root folder, so it'll keep your stuff away from their stuff. This is also important when you start doing other teams working your project. You could say Todd assets or whatever if you want to. So new folder, assets, and inside of assets I'm going to do, I don't think I'm going to bring any meshes, but I'll bring it in for next week. Meshes, and we have textures, and we have materials. Right, textures are the bitmaps that go into materials which materials are shaders, and then we're going to do some blueprints today. So let's do blueprints, and I kind of build off this structure with everything I do. So let's make a material. If I right click in this empty space, materials right there, I can create a blueprint, I can create material, I can create another level, create a particle system. And then materials are our first node-based system that we're going to be using. And there's I'm going to jump back real quickly since I've talked about organization. This is, if I look up a gentleman named Michael Allar, UE4 style guide. If you guys have, anyone knows what a style guide is, could tell me. Style guide? Anyone?
It's for a particular company or organization. It's basically how we're gonna organize things when we're gonna write code. So for example, like Airbnb, I think they do everything in camels.
Yeah. So basically, when you start a project, everyone tries to agree. A big project, you agree what style guide you're going to use, and these are the naming conventions for all these objects, right? So it's also how you use code. Are you going to be using Pascal case, camel case, snake case with the underscore, all this kind of stuff. This is pretty much the universal one for Unreal, and you just want to make sure that other people you're working with are using the same one. You're like, okay, we're using Michael Allar's. He's like a really grumpy developer on the West Coast that has tutorials and stuff. Makes fun of people. But it's really smart and really useful. A lot of C++ tutorials. So things like materials are m_, name of your material. So that way, if I'm searching for any material, I can look for m_, and that's another way of me drilling down and finding all my materials. Meshes all start with let's see how they do. Static mesh starts with an s_, right? And then we're going to create some material instances that is an mi_. So we're going to adhere to this so that we all are using the same naming convention. And this is all part of a style guide. So back here, I'm going to do this m_color. And I don't know if you guys can even see that, parent. I have some view options here, and I can scale things up so you guys can see. All right. So here's color parent. And let's open it up. And right now it's just that grid material, right? So everyone who's worked with color before, what is color in coding world? We divide it up into RG and B. So these things are 3 colors. Also, we have an alpha sometimes, and that would be RGBA, right? So if I want to start dealing with color, I want to deal with something that has what's called a 3 vector. It's 3 different numbers, okay? So I'm going to hold down the letter, or the number 3, and click, and I have a color wheel, okay? Double click on this, and I get to choose what color, okay? So just by default, the brightness is all the way down. So just remember that you have to bring that up too, so to get the color, right? And then I could dial in my hexalinear or whatever, and do however I want to think about it: hue, saturation, and brightness. Or if I want to do RGB, they're all here available for me. There's no alpha because I hit down 3. If I did 4, I would have an alpha that I could choose from as well. Okay. So we now have a purplish blue, and then here's our material, our node. Okay. This material has a lot of settings that we're going to talk about right here, and it has different properties. We're going to get more into these other things next week. This is called, we're using what's called physically based rendering, and it's a way of doing real-time rendering that is kind of a universal between all software. There's universal terminology. There's different ways of calling different kind of nodes. But for right now, we're going to use only 2 things or 3 things. We're going to deal with base color, emissive, which is like a brightness kind of thing, like it can glow. And then we're going to deal with opacity. We're going to deal with that alpha, okay? I'm going to, just to go ahead and do something, we're going to do that. Save, or I can say apply or whatever, and this is now my new material. Cool? So I have a purple material. What kind of material it is? Is it, well, that's fine, it's surface, but the blend mode is that sometimes we want to use translucent, so it has a gradient between completely transparent and fully there, right? That's translucent. And masked means it's either there or it's not there, okay? And translucent, while it looks very beautiful, is not very good for rendering. It's computationally expensive. Again, transparency is often things, glass is things you have to remove from VR projects often. Things where you're looking through because you're trying to render. If I'm obscuring something, if I'm creating a visual block between me and something, then it doesn't have to render anything behind. If it's translucent, I have to render everything that you can see through it. So you're doubling up pixels and polygons that you're rendering. So, but for right now, we have color. Let's go ahead and say translucent. And now it gives me the option to do opacity, right? And if I were to put in a number, so all these things are between 0 and 1. If I were going to give it a value of like 0.5, I can click down 1, give it a setting of like 0.5. That's not 0.5. And put it into opacity, and then we'd see we have like a ghost sphere. Cool. See, I can see it through halfway. If I made this 0, it would be not there at all. Okay, so this is transparency from 0 to 1. All right, and then the emissive color can also be a. Let's start doing some math. So if anyone's not working with the shaders, you do math with these numbers, right? You can add them, you can subtract them from each other, and multiply is if we want to add brightness, we can multiply, and it'll kind of cross our color with the brightness on the emission channel. So I'm going to hold down M and click. And I'm going to multiply purple by a value of some sort of number. So click on 1. Now if I just do this in the emissive, it's going to be black. And because I'm multiplying a color by 0, right, which is 0. Right, so it's now a black material. Therefore, in the same way, if I multiply by 1, it would just be that color, right? Actually, this should be black, but it's not black. I don't know what's going on there. Oh, let's see if I just got rid of this real quick. All right, so it's black, right? But what if I went over 1? Well, let's try that out. Let's go by 20. Apply. And now we have a light source, right? It doesn't actually illuminate anything, but it's like it has a glow to it. And you can go kind of crazy with it. See how it's this like bloom around it? So that's how it looks in the world. So that's great, but I didn't like how every time I clicked the number, I had to wait for it to change, right? It was really boring. So game engines are really lazy. They want to be as lazy as possible. And we need to say, no, it's time for you to allocate some resources towards things like my emissive and my opacity. I'm going to change those a whole bunch. So allocate memory for it, allocate some resources for it. So I'm going to right click on these and say convert to a parameter. And this parameter could be glow. That's fine. So glow. There we go. And then I want this one to be transparency or opacity. I added a comment. C adds in comments. If I click on an object and hit C, I can say, here's opacity. But we're going to name the parameter opacity. When you zoom out, you can like read it, right? Here's opacity. Oh, go ahead here. All right, so now we've made our first shader. We've done some math, and we've got an emissive channel. So how do I create an instance of this? What I've done is I've created some parameters. Oh, and let's make a parameter out of color. Or comment other. That also works. Let's see. Right. So I'm just going to kind of dock this over on the side. And then when I make instances of this, those instances will be able to drive those parameters in real time. Okay, so I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to create a material instance. Okay, and this one will be called MI green. You can see right there, material instance green, or material instance color green, so they're closer together, right? And this one can be instance off the parent again. Create a material instance color blue, and material instance color pink or yellow. So yellow. All right, so one guy gets one guy gets the other, and then gets the other. Okay. So now when I hit play, or when I yeah, so let's go ahead and do we hit play. So when I hit play, that looks crazy. Look at that. It's amazing. Let's go to our settings and change our scalability settings to epic. Yes. Super epic. All right. This is obviously easier with two screens, but Shift F1 to get my mouse back, and let's open up color blue. So this now, the material instance is a much more simplified way of looking at material that only looks at the parameters that I made, right? And while I'm playing, I can say, let's see how that looks. Let's do a little more glow. All right, all right. And it's doing it in real time, right? And I want opacity though. I want it to be glowy, but a little more transparent. So every time I let go of my mouse, it's putting it in there, right? So you adjust that one, and this one's called blue. So let's make it a little bit more blue. I have to check it off so I can change it. And by checking it off, I'm saying yes, do this in real time. Let's do a little blue. Cool. So now you see the power of making instances. So you're creating a master, takes a little more effort for it to render, but then you're saying, let's now build off this idea. You can imagine these things get really complicated and they get really, really dense, but they're running a lot quicker for you. You can mess around with stuff in real time so that you can see what it looks like inside of your environment. Green with crazy glow and yellow. And you see I'm just trying to find good real estate for stuff on my computer. And then yellow will be yellow. Was that yellow? That was yellow. Yellow. That's orange. That's yellow. Cool. So now we see, let's see if it stays when I hit escape. Yeah, so it saves it in there. So we've now kind of designed our world at runtime, and that helps us see how things look within the context of the other objects around them. You notice how the world's gotten a lot darker though? Right? By default, Unreal does auto exposure. That's kind of a thing people ask as well. I'll kind of jump ahead and say there's not a post-processing. A post-processing is a way of doing color grading to your entire scene, and I'm just going to add it in to show you guys auto exposure. So I'm adding in a volume, so I have a little more control over my environment, and it has a whole bunch of settings. All I care about is the one that's underneath exposure. And you see it has a range between 0.3 and 2. I'm just going to lock this at 1. So the minimum and the maximum is 1. Or actually 0.3 makes it brighter. 0.3. And then and right now it's only that way if I go inside of it. Shrink. See that? And I want to make that unbound so that it has no fall off. So for my entire world, make it infinite. And there we go. So now I just changed that so the auto exposure is off. One of the reasons why Unreal looks so beautiful is because it has a whole bunch of post-processing settings on by default. And if you're trying to optimize, sometimes you have to turn them off by adding in a post-processing and taking them off. I need to get rid of bloom and glow and motion blur and all these things that are harder to render. So there we go. We have our thing. We can get really bright. So if I open up this dude, right, I can really crank it now. Oh my goodness, it's so crazy. Alright, so have fun with that. There's a lot more settings to do in materials as well. Some of the fun ones are like if I open up this grass, and this is a cool one for non-photorealistic stuff. Open up the grass. There's a lot more here. Like there's just tons of stuff you can look at, right? Like two-sided. So if I go in something, I see the inside of it and the outside of it. There's also, let's see if I can render it as a wireframe. I'm just going to search for wireframe and say yes and save. And now like my landscape will be like this crazy wireframe. It'll look like space. It'll be real cool. We'll let the shaders compile. So now, there we go. Save everything. My map can be called assets and worlds, maps, levels, whatever you want to call it. And this is called wire world. Cool. Space world. Cool. So now let's talk about interactivity. There's two different kinds of blueprints that we're going to deal with early in this class. There are level blueprints. These are one-off interactions. These are things that are just going to happen in this level and not, let's see, if I was making a full game, if every time I go towards a door, it opens in a certain way, and we keep on doing that over and over again, we're going to make that an actor that's stored that we can continue to bring out and use again and again. One-off interactions, I'd put in my level blueprint. Level blueprints are nice because it's really easy to do key presses to test to make sure they work. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to build something in a level blueprint, see that we're going to make more than one of them, and say, oh, we should make this into an actor so that we can use many of them. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a light that we're going to turn off and on by traveling through like an invisible zone. All right, so I'm going to bring out a light. Little point light, right? We have a whole section of lights right here. Point light. That's not a point light. That's a point light. There we go. And you really can't see it because, you know, voila, I made it a wireframe. There we go. See lights and see the shadows. Right. So we want our. Let me put a. I like my wireframe so much that I want to keep it there. I'll just put like a little floor underneath here so we can see it. Cool. Alright, we got a little floor there. And then where's our player start? Oh, you're right there anyway. Cool, perfect. That's where I want you to be. Okay. So we have a light there, and we want to toggle the light off and on. Okay? So let's open up our level blueprint. And I'm going to select my light first, okay? Remember, Unreal has a lot of things that are context sensitive. If I do blueprints, open level blueprint, we have another kind of grid, right? This is another node base. This is our blueprints, okay? And who's done, like, you know, like JavaScript or processing or whatever? Where here we see a thing called event begin play and event tick. What are those? Those are like your void draw, right? In your void setup, it's just there waiting for you. Okay, things that happen at the beginning and things that happen every frame. Okay, we'll start with that. But one thing to note is that they are red. They're not being used; they're kind of ghosted out, but they're red, and those means they're events. They're sending out bangs. They're going to send events. And this yellow thing that I could drag off of is called an event node. Okay, we're going to send events when we begin playing, or this one will go as we do tick. Right? Now, I have that light selected. If I right-click in here, in context sensitive by default is selected, I can create a reference to a point light. Okay? And there's my point light. That's what I want to do things with. If I right-clicked and took off context sensitive, this is every single function in the entire game engine. And literally sometimes I just read through them like, I didn't know you could do that. Let's add that in. Let's try it for it. Try it. You might be surprised what you guys can do. But what would be even smarter, though, is if you drag off, do context sensitive, this is every function that can do something to a light. Right? So that helps you drill down and get rid of, like, 4/5 of everything. Cool? And as I said, we're going to talk about overlaps today. I want, when I go into an area, I want the light to turn off and then turn back on when I leave it. Okay? So I'm going to add in a trigger. Right? It's called a trigger. It's called a box trigger. Over here, and say box trigger. Put it in here. And make it so I can actually get through it. All right, I need to be able to hit it. Animals. All right, so we can scale this and make it bigger. And these are invisible, right? We don't want to, when we go to a door in our game, to see this invisible trigger. We just want it to be like a zone that's in front of the door would open up. But for me right now, I want to be able to see it for debugging. If I look down at my details, I can say, don't be hidden in game. So now when I hit play, I'll actually see that box. It'll be easier for me to turn this light off and on. And because the interactive zone is for this light, it's easier for me to know that it's the light's inside the zone. So when I go towards the light, it'll turn off. Now, we have the box, context sensitive. I'm going to right click on it. Sometimes you can't select things, so you select their little icon there, and I select the box, right? If I go over to my level blueprint, I'm going to right click, and now this is everything I could do with a trigger box. And you see I can add events for my trigger box, and 2 events are based off of collision, beginning and ending overlap. When I begin to overlap it, do something, and when I stop overlapping it, do something else. Let's just do begin for right now. And what do I want to do with my light? I said I wanted to toggle its visibility. Okay, so because I know visibility is a setting in the details, and I want to address the visibility. So if I click off here and I type in visibility, I can see that those are all the functions that deal with visibility in this light. And I see one that says toggle visibility, right? And very simply, when I go over the box, I want to turn the light on. When I go over the box again, it's going to turn it off. It's going to toggle off and on and off and on and off and on, right? You can make entire games with this logic, right? If I do this, then it does something else. If I do this, you can do something else. This is like the most straightforward mechanic that can take you a long, long way. All right, so let's make sure it works. Let's hit play. Real estate, let's hit play. Player start right there. I see the box, right? I made it visible. Off, on, right? Now, if it wasn't working and I wanted to see why it wasn't working, I might actually take this little blueprint right here, drag it off, and see if it's working or not by going, see how it's executing? So that's how it's data flow. You can watch the data flowing and you can debug in that way. All right? So not the most gratifying thing, but we got to start, okay? So let's do something with color because I think that's more interesting. All right? So I want to actually not worry about visibility. I want to do something with color. So what am I going to type? Color. So let's do something with color. And I get to set my light color. Let's set light color. Cool. Every time I overlap, let's set it. And now this light color, this is a, if I hold over there, it's called a structure. Anyone know what a structure is in coding? Yes.
It's not like a structure, it's something that you set spell.
Yeah, you can create your own structures. They're just combinations of different kinds of data, right? So if I right click on this color, you see it says split structure pen, and it's RGB and A, right? And I can combine that back and say recombine it, and now it's what's called a linear color. Yes.
A vector 3 would be a struct, right?
A vector 3, but this is a vector 4 because it has alpha too.
Right, I understand.
Yep. Yeah. So what we've done is, we can expose these, we split these apart, And we just know that a linear color type is like a C++ kind of terminology for getting at RGBA. Okay? Samantha, you have something?
Yeah, so that little bubble that says target point light component, did that
Mhm.
just
Yep.
automatically?
It automatically, yeah.
Okay.
So this object, this point light object, if I look at the details, it is an object that has inside of it a little point light, right? It's a point light that is a point light, right? And it's just automatically generated that we're getting, in this point light is actually a point light. It could be many, many things in there, and you can peek into all these blueprints this way, right? Here's a sky sphere, which is actually like a null with a spherical mesh inside of it, and that's how we can see inside our little blueprints. Pulls pants up, all right. So yeah, we have we want to set the color, and what is a fun thing to do? It's fun to do things randomly. Okay, so I want these are numbers from 0 to 1, and so what do I want to do? I want to get a random number, right? A random integer, right? We're dealing with data types of integers or floats. Sorry, random floats. So random. Oops. Random, I could do a random bool, I could do a random float, I could do a random integer, I could do a random pointer, all those different things, a random rotator. I want to do a random float, and I want it to be from 0 to 1, so we want it to be in a range. And the minimum is 0, and the maximum is 1. And I want each one to have its unique random number, so because I maximize my randomness. So I'm going to Control W, make a little duplicate, and then Control W, and make a little duplicate. And there we go, random color. Cool. So every time I go in there, it's going to be a new random color. I always want to be able to see the color as much as possible, so we're going to give it 1 for alpha, and I compile, and I'm going to save, and then let's try it.
So the values aren't 0 to 255?
No, they're 0 to 1 in here, and the reason I know that is because if I recombined it and I could open up a color wheel, and then I can easily say, if I hold down Alt to click, I can get rid of these little wires, recombine it, and then I can also just say make structure or make linear color, and it gives me a way of bringing them together this way. And then I can go there, but this are all from 0 to 1. Right, that's another way of doing it. So without further ado, let's do our magic. All right, so if I come in here, what's going on? Oh, it is a new color. There we go. So here we go, green, blue, all that kind of stuff, right? Let's add in, let's just rotate this a little bit. Oops, undo. Hold down Alt, it'll duplicate it as I rotate it. There we go. And then over here, let's give another wall to bounce off of. Okay. So here's our color. Right. And we can also bring down the intensity of our sun, which is kind of crazy color. Let's bring down our light source, move it down, make it darker. We can also, of course, make it back to midnight as well, so it's easier to see. Or we can add in a roof. There we go. I don't know if that all helped or not. Green. Okay, so what if I want to do that 100 times though? I'd have to bring out a trigger box, to bring out another light, and then I have to copy and paste those random things and plug them all in. So here's where we probably want to start making a blueprint, right? We're going to make a class, and each of these objects will be an object of this class. Okay, so find my folder for blueprints. You guys are troopers for sticking with me. All right. Actor blueprint, as I said, tons of kinds of blueprints. We're just going to do an actor blueprint. Actor blueprint can do anything, but it has nothing really exposed for us. It's not specialized in any way. And I'm going to say BP, because that's our style guide. And we're going to say BP light. Cool? BP light right there. And then I open it up. it has its own little world there. And then you see we now have an event graph that has some other things. Begin play. Overlap is built in because we use it so much. And then tick. And then we have another thing called construction script. And these are things we build before we even hit play. Right? Event begin play is when it first starts, but this construction script is more like setup, right? Void setup thing. Yeah, it's void setup, yeah. So construction script right there. We'll get that maybe a little bit later. But what we want right now is we want to make this. We're going to bring it into the world. There's a little null for it. That's a default scene root. That's a null. Right? That's that little thing right here. It means nothing. And we're going to start building it here and watching it being built over there. Right? So I'm going to bring in the box trigger, right? Box collision. And then when I click on that, you see it's being built over here. Right? It's in the world. You can also just build it over here and not look at it. And as I scale it in this world, we see it getting bigger. Right? So we're building a blueprint in the world. Cool. And then I am going to add in a light. And there's our light. See that? And then let's go over here and let's save ourselves a little time and grab all that. And this is actually, you can copy paste this as text. You can send in emails. It's just like HTML kind of thing. I'm going to go over here. It's a markup language kind of thing. So paste it. There it is. All right, it has the same values as before. And let's grab a reference to the point light. And then on our box, if I look over here, there's all sorts of events that can be triggered from it. Or I can right click and say, here's all these events. There's the same list on both sides. Many ways to do it. And we see one that says begin overlap. Cool. There's a lot of other things where you can say only if certain things overlap it, if it gets overlapped by certain other things. So we can drill down and say only if this equals something in our world do we want it to trigger. Right now we're just saying anything that hits it. This is a case of like rolling blocks or whatever. You want to say, oh, don't ignore the rolling blocks, only doing when my main character hits it. So now when I overlap, and you know what? Also, when I end overlap. So both when I go in and when I leave, I want to do the same thing. I just want to make a lot of colors. So I can have two events triggering. Right? And again, with this light, this is just one property that I'm looking at, right? I'm looking at the visibility. Or I was looking at color, which is right here, right? Light, color. But all these things can be driven. Just write them in, and you can change them, right? You can make it get less intense, more intense. You can have it do all sorts of things. And then these are just lights. What if we want our object to grow? We can make, make this box twice as big. That's your transform. That's your scale, your rotation, position. You can make it so when you touch something, it always goes a little bit further away from you. You're like, stop it. So let's make sure this works. Right? We plug it in. Boom. And let's try it out. And it works. Works. Yellow, blue, green. Great. Let's make it darker in the world. Let's go to our light source and do 180, 90, 90. And sky sphere it up. And let's also do a quick grayscale material. Assets, materials, a new one called Gray. I don't care about RGB and all that stuff. I just care about it being gray. 0.5. Make it a parameter. Gray scale. I did that again. I said grayscale. Coolio, and I'm going to make an instance of it, and I'm going to drag it on. here, so we can see a little better, and here. Cool. So now we have a better idea what our things are doing. And I didn't save. You see it doesn't have the parameter there. I have to come back here and actually hit save. And that's a good mistake to make. And then magically, my parameter's there. Make it a little darker. Cool. So now we can see a light much better. But what do we have that now the ability to do? We have this blueprint. I'm going to click on the blueprint. I'm going to do Control B to go to find it in my content browser. Or I could have said Browse to Asset. There it is. And now you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. Right? So now look how quickly we're... If you're making something more than once, make a blueprint out of it. Right? And these blueprints are denoted by the fact they have hyperlink here, that if I click it, it'll open it up. Cool? And now, that should be enough actually. We can get more into blueprints next time, but so now I have my whole disco party. Alright. So disco party at the wireframe island. There you go. Cool. So you know, that's pretty much it. I think that the one other thing I would mention is that you don't have to be dramatic with something. You can actually be you actually can do a timeline, a very small little curve, and it's one of the most used things. If I just right click here and go to the very, very bottom, I can add a timeline. And I don't really need to name it, but it's something that I can play and it has duration. Right? So I'd say over the course of 2 seconds, let me change a float, a vector, which is 3 floats, right? A event track, let me trigger something at a certain time. I trigger it and 2 seconds later trigger something else, or I can change a color. Right? And on the top here is color, on the bottom there is opacity, and I say, oops, nope, not what I wanted. So let's go from, when I hit a trigger, I want you to go from blue to another color to yellow, purple, yellow, something like that, right? And so this can actually, this is a linear color, right? I can literally say, go into here and play. So when I go in, I want you to play from the start, or just play, and when I leave, I want to reverse. So I'm just going to start pushing and pulling it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that gets you into the idea of a timeline, which is something you explore. If you don't want to just make things pop to a place, you want to push it someplace, this gives you an animation. Right, so I want to update this. So every tick of this 2 seconds is going to update it and send it this linear color. Right? And so I did this to BP light, and this is going to happen to all of them. Slowly turn to, let's see why it's not doing it. From purple to yellow. Let's go back and take a look. Play. When I begin, play, point light, finished, direction. Let's take a look at this real quick. And from 0 to 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Save. Let's try one more time. They're all white, so I hit it, starts purple. Let's bring it over here. Take a look at it. Play. Let's do play from start. And anyway, this will be the last thing we do, and then we'll all head. Play from start and play from reverse from end. Cool, that works. There it goes. Right? Play from start, end from start, play from start, end from start. Oh, it's because I wasn't staying inside of them. That was all it was. We had to be able to see it. I was just running through them real quick. So let's just do it the way it should be done. Play and reverse. That's what was happening. So when I go inside of them, it's going to change to yellow. When I leave, it'll go back to purple. Purple to yellow, and from yellow to purple. There we go. So anyway, the timeline is a way of also doing, rotations and position stuff over a course of time. Cool. So that's a lot, but I want to kind of let you guys, show you it's not too much, right? Maybe we did a lot of topics, but nothing was too hard by itself. So mess around with these colors. Don't worry about just don't worry about making it too complicated. Just try to do 2 interactions and try to think about starting to build kind of a level that is something that is designed with VR in mind. Again, this whole thing I did without doing VR once, so we could do it from your computers. And we'll talk